Listen to me carefully. I gave my youth, my sleep, my health, and my entire future to my family for 5 long years. I worked 18 hours a day in a foreign country so they could build a better life back home. And when I finally returned, tired but proud, I expected tears, hugs, and maybe even a little corner in the house I helped build. Instead, I found a beautiful home built with my money and a family determined to make me feel like I never existed. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how my own blood tried to shame me, silence me, and push me out of the life I paid for. I was born in a small town where dreams were expensive and dignity was cheap. We were not rich. We were not even stable. Some months there was enough food. Some months there was not. My father worked when he could, but his body was weak, and jobs were harder to keep as he got older. My mother carried the house on her back. I had 2 brothers and 1 younger sister, and I was the one who always understood early that if I wanted a different life, I would have to build it myself. I never blamed my family for being poor. Poverty was not the enemy. What hurt me was how normal everyone had become with surviving instead of living. When I was 23, the opportunity came to work abroad. It was not glamorous. It was not easy. It was one of those jobs people look down on until they need the money. But I said yes without hesitation. I told myself I would go for a few years, work hard, save every dollar I could, and come home with enough money to change everything. The day I left, my mother cried so hard she could barely speak. She held my hands and said, "Claire, you are our hope." My youngest sister hugged me like she never wanted to let go. My brothers were quiet, too quiet. My father put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Make us proud." I remember standing at the airport with one small suitcase and one big promise in my heart. I promised them I would send money every month. I promised I would help build the house we all dreamed about. I promised I would come back and take care of everyone. And I meant it. The country I moved to was cold in every way. Not just the weather. The work was cold. The people were cold. The rooms I lived in were cold. I worked at a restaurant first, then cleaned offices at night, then took on extra shifts wherever I could. Some days, I worked so long that when I looked in the mirror, I did not even recognize my own face. There were nights I fell asleep sitting up. There were mornings I woke up with my shoes still on. There were days my hands shook from exhaustion, but I still kept moving because I remembered why I was there. Every month, I sent money home. Every month, I cut my own expenses until there was almost nothing left. No vacations, no shopping, no real rest, no romance, no soft life. Just work, work. My family called often in the beginning. They sounded thankful. My mother would tell me what bills had been paid. My father would say, "We could never do this without you." My sister would laugh and say the house was beginning to look real now. My brothers would talk about the plans. A bigger kitchen, 2 bathrooms, a proper roof, a front gate, a little garden. I smiled through those calls and kept sending more. When prices went up, I sent more. When they said a wall needed repairs, I sent more. When they said they needed furniture, I sent more. When they said the construction had stopped because money ran short, I sent more. I did not live for myself for 5 years. I lived for a home I had never seen finished. And I believed, truly believed, that when I came back I would finally be valued. I imagined walking into a house built from my sacrifice, hearing my family say, "Claire, this is your room." I imagined my mother placing my bag down and saying, "You are home now." I imagined laughter, food, peace, a sense that all of it had meant something. The day I booked my flight home, I cried alone in my room, not because I was sad, because I was finally proud of myself. I had done it. I had survived 5 brutal years, and I was coming home with savings, strength, and the quiet hope that my family would see me not as a burden, not as a daughter who disappeared, but as the one who held them together from thousands of miles away. When I landed, the air felt different, warmer, familiar. The roads I remembered were rougher now. The trees were the same, but everything else felt smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had changed so much that my old life no longer fit me the same way. I hired a taxi and gave the driver the address. As we got closer, I started to see it. The house. It stood there like proof of my sacrifice. It was bigger than I expected. Fresh paint, a proper roof, tall windows, a front porch, a tiled entryway. It was beautiful. For 1 second, I just sat there staring, unable to speak. My heart beat fast. I remember thinking, my money built this. My years built this. My pain built this. I laughed softly, almost through tears. I could already picture my mother's smile. I paid the driver, picked up my suitcase, and walked toward the gate. Before I even knocked, the front door opened. My sister stood there. She froze when she saw me. Not with joy, not with shock, with something colder. Then my mother came behind her, and her face changed in an instant too. The smile I had imagined did not come. No tears, no running toward me, just a strange stillness, like they were trying to decide what to do with me. Claire, my mother said slowly, like she was testing the name. I smiled, holding my suitcase handle tighter. I'm home. My sister looked over her shoulder before stepping outside. You should have called before coming. I blinked. I did. Yesterday. You said everyone would be here. My mother crossed her arms. We weren't expecting you this early. Early? After 5 years? I looked past them into the house. The living room was clean and new. The curtains were expensive. The furniture looked brand new. The walls had family pictures. There was even a chandelier hanging from the ceiling. I felt a strange warmth and ache at the same time. This is beautiful, I said softly. It came out really well. Nobody answered. Then my oldest brother appeared in the doorway, and the moment he saw me, his expression hardened. He did not say welcome home. He said, "What are you doing here?" My smile faded. I came home. He laughed once, short and cruel. Home. You think you still have a place here? I remember my fingers going numb around my suitcase handle. What do you mean? I asked. My mother looked away. My sister stepped closer and lowered her voice, like she was speaking to a stranger. Claire, people have been talking. I stared at her. What people? She hesitated, then said, about your life abroad, about what you were doing over there. My stomach tightened. What are you talking about? My brother folded his arms and said, You know exactly what I'm talking about. Don't act innocent. And that was the moment I knew something was deeply wrong. I said, I worked. I sent money. I built this house with you. My sister looked at me with a kind of cold pity that hurt worse than anger. That's not what people are saying, she said. They say you were living shamefully abroad. They say you were with men for money. They say the things you sent home came from dirty work. For a few seconds, I could not breathe. The world became quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat and nothing else. I looked at my mother. Do you believe that? She still would not meet my eyes. That told me everything. My throat burned. After everything I sacrificed, you believe a lie? My brother stepped forward. We don't know what to believe, Claire. But you cannot just come back here acting like a hero. You've embarrassed this family. Embarrassed? I felt a laugh rise in my chest, but it was the kind of laugh that comes from shock and pain. Embarrassed this family? I repeated. I sent every cent I had. I worked until my body broke. I skipped meals so you could have a roof. And this is what you say to me? My sister's voice got sharper. We didn't ask you to ruin your reputation. I stared at her in disbelief. Then my mother finally spoke, and her words cut deeper than anyone else's. Claire, maybe it is better if you stay somewhere else for now, until things calm down. I felt like the ground had fallen out from under me. Stay somewhere else. After 5 years of sacrifice, after all my money, all my nights, all my tears, they were asking me to leave. My own family. From the house I built. I turned to my father, hoping, praying he would stop this madness. He stood by the doorway, older now. His shoulders bent a little more than I remembered. He looked tired, guilty, maybe, but he still said nothing. That silence broke something inside me. I asked him, Papa, say something. He swallowed hard. Then he said, maybe it is not a good time. Not a good time. For me to come home? For me to stand in the house I paid for? For me to exist? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my suitcase down and ask them how long they had been planning this. How long had they been feeding each other lies about me? How long had they been using my money while preparing to shame me the moment I returned? But I did not scream. I was too tired for screaming. That night, they did not let me sleep in the house. They said there was no room. No room. In a house I helped build. So I sat on the bench outside the gate with my suitcase beside me, staring at the windows glowing with warm light while I sat in the dark like an outsider. I was numb, but not broken. Not yet. Because hurt has a strange way of sharpening you. And while I sat there, the pieces started to come together. The lies did not start today. They had been growing for months, maybe longer. Someone had been whispering in ears. Someone had been feeding my family a story about me. A story that made my sacrifice look like shame. A story that made it easier for them to enjoy my money and reject my name. At that moment I was crying, but I was also thinking, and once I started thinking clearly, I remembered things I had ignored for years. The way my sister always asked for more money, but never once showed me receipts. The way my brother once joked, you are too far away to check anything anyway. The way my mother would change the subject whenever I asked about the construction details. The way nobody ever sent me progress pictures unless I asked 3 times. The way they always made me feel guilty if I questioned anything. I had been trusting them. They had been using me. The next morning I left early and went to the local bank where I had sent most of my transfers. I asked for copies. I got every record I could. Every transfer, every amount, every date. Then I went to the construction office. I asked for the name on the permit, the payment history, the project receipts. And that was where the truth began to rise. The house was not just built with my money. It had been registered in my mother's name. Not mine, not shared, just hers. I remember sitting there, staring at the paper in front of me, as if the letters might change if I looked hard enough. My name was nowhere. The money came from me. The house belonged to her. I felt cold, Eloa. Not because I was surprised, because part of me had feared this for years, and still hoped I was wrong. I drove back home with the papers in my bag. When I walked in, everyone was in the living room. They looked startled to see me return so soon. I placed the documents on the table. What is this? I asked. Nobody spoke. I looked at my mother. Why is the house in your name? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. My brother tried to reach for the papers, but I pulled them back. No, I said. You were going to answer me. My mother finally said, it was for the family. I stared at her. For the family? Yes, she said. We all live here. I nodded slowly. Then why was I told there was no room for me? Silence. I looked at my father. Did you know? He lowered his eyes. That answer was enough. My youngest sister started crying. Not because she was sorry, because she knew it was over. Her tears were not for me. They were for the lie being exposed. I said, I worked myself to the bone for this family. I gave you everything, and you let people destroy my name instead of defending me. My brother snapped. You are not innocent, Claire. Nobody gives that kind of money without something dirty attached. I turned to him so fast he stepped back. You are talking to the person who paid for your roof, I said, my voice shaking now but still clear. You are living in a house I made possible, and you dare call me dirty because other people lied. He looked away. That was when I understood the truth fully. They had not only accepted the lies, they had found them useful. It was easier for them to believe I had done something shameful than to admit they had depended on me completely. It was easier to humiliate me than to thank me. It was easier to erase me than to share what I had earned them. I stood there in the middle of that beautiful house, and for the first time in 5 years, I stopped feeling like their child. I felt like a woman looking at strangers. I said quietly, I am not leaving. My mother's head snapped up. What? I am not leaving, I repeated. I paid for this house. I have every record, every receipt, every transfer, every proof. And if you think you can push me out with rumors, you are wrong. My brother stepped forward. You would not dare make this a public fight. I looked him in the eye. Watch me. The room went silent. Then I pulled out my phone and called my bank lawyer. Yes, I had prepared myself over the years. Not because I expected betrayal, but because I learned the hard way that money without proof is only hope. I had kept records, screenshots, transfer confirmations, messages, everything. I also had one more thing. During my time abroad, I had quietly sent a small part of each transfer into a separate savings account in my name only. No one knew, not even my family. I had learned to protect something for myself just in case. That savings would not replace what I had lost, but it would give me power. And power was something my family never expected me to have. Within days, the house truth came out fully. The property had been bought using my money, but the legal papers were arranged in my mother's name through a relative who helped them manage the paperwork. They had planned it that way so they could control everything. They had not intended to shut me out at first, maybe. But once the gossip started, once they heard the lies about my work abroad, they used those lies as an excuse to keep me at a distance. A shameful daughter was easier to discard than a hardworking one. But they made one mistake. They underestimated how much I had learned while suffering far from home. They thought I was still the girl who left with one suitcase and a hopeful heart. I was not that girl anymore. I had lived through loneliness. I had survived humiliation in a foreign land. I had learned how to be invisible, and I had also learned how to become impossible to ignore. When the lawyer sent the first notice, my family tried to panic. Then they tried to guilt me. Then they tried to rewrite the story. My mother called me crying and said, Claire, family should not go to court. I answered calmly, family should not spread lies about each other either. My father begged me not to destroy the household. I said, I did not destroy it. I built it. My sister told me people would laugh at us. I said, they should have thought of that before they tried to embarrass me. And my brothers, those same brothers who had barely lifted a stone during construction, suddenly acted like protectors of the family name. But the truth was already out. Neighbors had started asking questions. People wanted to know why Claire, the daughter who sent money for years, was being treated like a guest in the house she paid for. Some even came to me privately and said they had always suspected something was wrong. The rumor had not made me ashamed. It had only exposed the people who were willing to believe it. In the end, there was no neat victory, no perfect apology, no magical moment where everyone broke down and admitted how wrong they were. Life is not always that generous. What I got was something quieter but stronger. I got my name back. I got my legal share. I got access to the truth. And I got the chance to walk into that house again, not as a rejected daughter, not as a guest, not as someone they could silence, but as the person who had every right to stand there. The first time I returned after everything changed. My mother looked at me with a face full of fear and regret. My father looked older than ever. My brothers would not meet my eyes. My sister, who had once spoken to me like I was garbage on the roadside, stood in the corner with folded hands. I wish I could say I forgave them right away. I did not. Maybe I never fully will. Because some wounds do not disappear just because the truth comes out. But I did speak. I looked at all of them and said, I worked 18 hours a day for 5 years so this family could live better. I gave you the best years of my life. I was not asking for worship. I was asking for respect. And instead of giving me a place at the table, you tried to push me out of the house I built. No one interrupted me. For once, no one dared. I continued. Never confuse my silence with weakness again. I stayed quiet because I was working. I stayed quiet because I was surviving. I stayed quiet because I trusted you. But trust is not the same as blindness. And I was never blind. Then I picked up my bag and walked to the room that should have been mine all along. It was not large, it was not grand, but it was mine now. Finally, and legally, and more importantly, it was proof that I could survive even the deepest betrayal. That night I sat by the window and looked out at the house glowing under the moonlight. It was strange. I had once dreamed that coming home would feel like peace. It did not. It felt harder than that. It felt like truth. And sometimes truth hurts more than lies because lies let you keep hoping. Truth tells you exactly who people are. I learned that day that family is not just blood. Family is who protects you when your name is under attack. Family is who remembers your sacrifice when you are no longer useful. Family is who makes room for you, not just your money. And I also learned something about myself. I was not just the girl who sent money home. I was not just the daughter they misunderstood. I was not the shame they tried to invent. I was the woman who built a future with her own hands, even when no one clapped for her. So if you are listening to my story right now, let this stay with you. Never give so much of yourself that you disappear in the lives of people who only love what you provide. Never confuse silence for peace. And never forget that the people who benefit most from your sacrifice are sometimes the first ones to call you a stranger when you come home. My name is Claire. I worked 18 hours a day abroad for 5 years. I sent money home with love in my heart. And after I moved into that room, I thought the worst was already behind me. I was wrong. Because the truth does not always end a betrayal. Sometimes it reveals how deep the betrayal really was. The next morning, I woke up early and heard voices outside my door. Not soft voices, not worried voices, angry voices. My brother was pacing the hallway, saying things like, "She is trying to ruin us," and "She only came back to take everything. Take everything." I almost laughed, as if I had not already given them everything for 5 years. I opened the door and stepped into the hall. They all turned quiet for a second. My mother stood near the kitchen, looking exhausted. My father sat at the dining table with his hands folded together. My sister looked like she had not slept. My brothers looked defensive, like they were waiting for me to attack. I did not raise my voice. I just said, "You should all understand something now. I am not here to fight for attention. I am here because I belong here." My oldest brother scoffed. "You belong here now because the papers helped you." I looked at him carefully. "No," I said. "I belong here because I paid for this place with my life, my labor, and my years. The papers only exposed what you tried to hide." He pushed his chair back and stood up. "You think you are the only one who suffered." That one sentence hit me so hard I had to breathe slowly before answering. I said no. I know others suffered. That was the point. I sent money so this family would not have to suffer the way I did. He said nothing. Because he knew I was right. Then my mother spoke in a low voice. Claire, maybe we made mistakes, but you have to understand how things looked from the outside. I looked at her. From the outside. That phrase again. As if gossip mattered more than the truth. What looked bad? I asked. That I worked hard? That I sacrificed? That I trusted my family? My mother lowered her eyes. I continued. You did not question the rumors because they were convenient. They gave you an excuse to turn your back on me. Her lips trembled, but she still did not deny it. That silence was the answer again. I turned and walked into the kitchen. The house was beautiful, yes, but every corner now felt haunted by something ugly. I saw the new cabinets, the polished floor, the expensive curtains. All of it looked different now. Not like a home, like evidence. I touched the counter with my fingertips and thought about every night I had worked until my back hurt. I thought about the meals I skipped. I thought about the birthdays I missed. I thought about the years I spent hearing other people laugh in their own homes while I slept in a tiny room far away from everything familiar. All of that money had become this house. And for a while, I think my family had genuinely convinced themselves that the sacrifice belonged to everyone equally, while the pain belonged only to me. That day, I asked to see every remaining document connected to the house. My mother stiffened. My brother said, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm done asking questions politely." That got their attention. They brought out old folders, half-finished papers, construction receipts and bank slips. Some were missing, some looked altered, some had names crossed out. It was clear someone had tried to cover their tracks badly and in a hurry. My heart sank and rose at the same time. Sank because the betrayal was bigger than I thought. Rose because now I knew I was not imagining anything. It was real, all of it. There had been a plan. Maybe not at first. Maybe at first it was just greed, carelessness, and the old family habit of treating my money like a common pool. But at some point, the line had been crossed. At some point, they had decided that I was useful only when I was far away and silent. That afternoon, I called a relative I trusted. Not one of the people living in that house. Someone older. Someone honest. Someone who had never benefited from my money. When he arrived, he looked at me with sad eyes and said, "Claire, I am sorry. I knew some things were not right." That sentence made my chest tighten. "You knew?" I asked. He nodded slowly. People in the area had started talking months ago. Some said ugly things about you. Some said your family was ashamed. I did not believe all of it, but I also did not know the truth. I swallowed hard. So the lie had spread beyond my house. It had touched the neighborhood too. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I cared about gossip. I did not. But because I realized how lonely I had been all along. I had been abroad thinking I was building a future, while back home, a story was being built without me, and I was not even there to defend myself. My relative looked at the papers and shook his head. "This is not right. You need to protect yourself now." And that was the moment I stopped thinking only like a daughter. I started thinking like a woman who had been betrayed too many times to stay soft about it. That week, I met with a lawyer again. Then I met with a property expert. Then I met with someone who could verify the transfer history and the construction payments. I made copies of everything. Not one copy. Many copies. I did not trust a single drawer in that house anymore. My family noticed I was moving differently. Quietly. Deliberately. Without asking them for permission. That made them nervous. My sister started trying to speak to me more gently. My mother began bringing tea to my room. My father asked small questions about my work abroad, as if asking about my life now might somehow repair what he had done by staying silent then. My brothers, though, became more hostile. They hated that I was calm. They wanted me emotional. They wanted me to cry, shout, break plates, Do something messy enough for them to point at and say, "See? We told you she came back angry." But I did not give them that. Instead, I kept gathering proof. And once the local paperwork issues came to light, something even more painful happened. People began apologizing to me, not my family, the neighbors. The same people who had whispered behind my back, now suddenly saying, "We didn't know. We heard different things. We thought you were gone for good. We are sorry." Some of those apologies were genuine. Some were embarrassed. Some came too late to mean much. But they all reminded me of the same truth. A woman can survive a lie, but she never forgets who helped spread it. One evening, my youngest sister came into my room and sat on the edge of the bed. She looked smaller than I remembered. She said, "I never wanted this." I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I know," I said. She started crying then, and for the first time, her tears looked real. "I was scared," she whispered. "Everyone kept saying things. Mother was worried. Brother was angry. Father was silent. I didn't know what to believe." I nodded slowly. "Did you ask me?" She shook her head. "No." "Did you defend me?" She cried harder. "No." I sat there quietly and let the silence speak for itself. Then I said, "That is the part that hurts most. Not that people lied, but that nobody thought I deserved the chance to answer." She covered her mouth and looked away. I was not cruel to her, but I was not comforting either, because pain teaches you that forgiveness without accountability is just another way to betray yourself. The next step came faster than my family expected. The lawyer filed the claim. Officially. Legally. No more whispers. No more side conversations. No more family meetings where they could pretend this was only an emotional misunderstanding. Now it was real. Now the house, the money, and the records all had to be examined properly. That is when the panic truly started. My mother asked me to stay out of the legal process. I said no. My father asked me to consider the family's reputation. I said, "You should have considered mine first." My brothers tried one more time to pressure me privately. One of them said, "Claire, this can still be settled quietly. Why embarrass everyone?" I looked at him and asked, "Was it not embarrassing when you let strangers call me filthy? Was it not embarrassing when you used my money but denied me a room? Was it not embarrassing when you watched me sit outside that gate like a stranger?" He had no answer, because the truth is simple. Some people only care about embarrassment when the shame turns back toward them. For days, the house felt tense. Everyone spoke less. Doors closed more softly. Meals became quieter. No one knew where to sit around me anymore. And strangely, that was the first time I understood how much power I actually had. Not because I wanted power, because I had finally stopped begging for belonging. I had gone from desperate to careful, from hopeful to watchful, from wounded to awake. Then came the day that changed everything again. A local official arrived with records. He asked questions about the property, the source of the funds, and the registration process. My family tried to answer. Their voices were uneven. Their stories did not match. One said one thing. Another contradicted it. The paperwork spoke louder than all of them. I sat there at the table with my hands folded calmly while everything they built out of lies started collapsing in front of them. My mother looked at me with tears in her eyes this time. Real tears. "Claire," she said, "please. İmet hergaze. Please." "What?" I asked. She looked around the room, then back at me. "Please do not take the house away from us." There it was. The truth. Not love. Not apology. Fear. Fear of losing the thing my sacrifice built. I took a deep breath. "I never wanted to take away your home," I said. "I wanted to come home. There is a difference." No one spoke. I continued, "You made me feel unwelcome in a place I paid for. You let people destroy my name. You treated my return like a threat instead of a blessing. My voice stayed steady, but inside I could feel years of pain pressing against my ribs. Then I said the words I think they had all been avoiding since I arrived. You do not get to enjoy the comfort of my sacrifice and reject the woman who made it possible. That line landed hard. My father shut his eyes. My mother sat down slowly. My brother stared at the floor. My sister began to cry again. And me? I felt something unexpected. Not joy, not revenge, relief. Because finally, I was no longer carrying the lie alone. The truth had entered the room. And once truth enters, fear changes shape. It was not instant. Nothing in real life is. There were still arguments, more legal steps, more documents, more explanations. But the balance had shifted. The family that once thought I was too far away to matter was now forced to look at everything I had done, everything I had sent, everything I had given, and everything they had hidden. The house was still there. The walls were still standing. But the story inside it had changed forever. And maybe that is the part people do not understand. A house is not just bricks. It is memory. It is sacrifice. It is who stayed awake and who slept peacefully. It is who carried the burden and who pretended not to see it. By the time the process began moving in my favor, I had stopped asking for apologies. I had learned something else. An apology cannot return the years someone stole from you. It cannot erase the humiliation. It cannot restore the version of yourself that trusted too easily. But it can still be a beginning. A beginning only, not the end. One evening, my father came to my room alone. He stood in the doorway for a long time before speaking. "Claire," he said quietly, "I was wrong." That was all. 3 words. Small words. Heavy words. I looked at him, and for a moment, I saw not the man who had failed me, but the tired father who had let fear and shame win over truth. I asked him, "Why didn't you defend me?" He lowered his head. "I was afraid of what people would say." I nodded slowly. That answer hurt, but it was honest. He went on, "I thought if I stayed quiet, the storm would pass." I smiled bitterly. "But I was the storm," I said, "and you left me outside in it." He started crying then, quietly, like old men do when regret has been sitting inside them too long. I did not comfort him, but I did not throw him out either. Because some moments do not need cruelty. They need witnessing. And in that moment, we both witnessed the damage. That night, after he left, I sat on the bed and realized something very important. I had spent 5 years believing I was building a future for my family. But in the process, I had also been building a future for myself without knowing it. A future where I could survive betrayal. A future where I could stand alone. A future where I did not have to beg for basic respect. A future where my worth was not decided by people who needed me small. That was the real gift hidden inside all the pain. Not the house. Not the money. Me. I became stronger because they tested every soft place in me. And still, they failed to break me. So yes, the house was built with my money. Yes, they tried to shame me. Yes, they tried to push me out. But in the end, they could not erase the truth that I had lived through 5 years of sacrifice and came back with my head still high. And that is why this story matters. Because so many people give too much to the wrong hands. They think loyalty will protect them. They think family will always be fair. They think sacrifice automatically creates love. It does not. Sometimes sacrifice only reveals character. Sometimes it shows you who is grateful and who is greedy. Sometimes it shows you who will hold your hand and who will shut the door. I learned that the hard way, but I learned it. And now, when I look at that house, I do not just see betrayal. I see proof. Proof that I survived. Proof that I provided. Proof that I was right to trust my own records more than their words. Proof that a woman with nothing but work, discipline, and truth can outlast lies told by her own blood. My name is Claire. I worked 18 hours a day abroad for 5 years. I sent money home because I believed in my family. They built a beautiful house with my sacrifice. Then they tried to erase me from it. But I came back. I stood my ground, and I forced the truth into the light. And that truth changed everything. Because in the end, they did not just lose control of the house. They lost control of the story. And I got myself back. Claire here. And once I got myself back, everything else started changing too. Not all at once. Not beautifully. Not peacefully. But it changed. For the first time in years, I stopped waking up with the feeling that I had to earn my place in the world before breakfast. I stopped lowering my voice just to keep the peace. I stopped apologizing for the fact that I had worked hard, sent money home, and built something that others tried to claim without giving me the respect I deserved. That did not mean the pain disappeared. It only meant I stopped letting the pain make my decisions for me. The house still felt heavy with memory. Every wall carried a story now. Every room had a shadow attached to it. The kitchen reminded me of the lies whispered over family meals. The living room reminded me of the day I was told I had no room. The front gate reminded me of the night I sat outside, like a stranger in my own life. But one room in that house began to feel different. My room. Not because it was large, not because it was fancy, but because it was the first place in that house where I could close the door and breathe without being watched like a problem. I started unpacking slowly. One suitcase, then another, then the boxes I had brought back from abroad. Inside them were not expensive things, just pieces of my life that no one else had seen. A few books, a sweater I wore on cold nights, old notebooks where I had written goals to keep myself alive, a small photograph of myself at the airport on the day I left, pretending to be brave while my hands were shaking. When I held that photograph, I almost cried. That girl looked so young, so full of hope, so sure that sacrifice would be met with gratitude. I wanted to tell her she was not foolish. I wanted to tell her she was simply loyal in a world that often punishes loyalty. A few days later, the tension in the house became impossible to ignore. My brothers avoided me, unless they had to speak. My mother had gone from cold to soft in a strange way, like she suddenly remembered I was her daughter only after she realized the law was not on her side. My sister kept trying to act helpful, bringing me tea, asking small questions, trying to rebuild closeness out of guilt. My father mostly stayed quiet, but now his silence looked different. Before, his silence had felt like betrayal. Now it felt like fear. Fear of the truth. Fear of what he had allowed. Fear of how long it had taken me to stop protecting the family image more than my own dignity. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen when I heard my oldest brother speaking on the phone in the back courtyard. He did not know I could hear him. His voice was low, angry, and ugly. "She is making everything difficult," he said. "She came back acting like a victim, but she's only creating drama. She always liked attention." I stood there behind the door, completely still. Then he said something worse. If she had really been respectable abroad, none of this would be happening. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was again. The same poison, the same lie, the same cowardly way of turning my pain into my fault. I walked out into the courtyard. He turned around and froze when he saw me. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Say it again." He frowned. "What?" "Say it again," I repeated. "Say to my face what you just said on that phone." He looked uncomfortable, but not sorry. "That you should stop acting like a saint," he muttered. "People are talking for a reason." I laughed once, not because it was funny, because I was finally tired enough to stop being shocked. People talk. I said calmly. Cowards listen. He stepped forward. Careful, Claire. I looked at him and said, No, you be careful. Because I have spent 5 years carrying this family on my back, and I will not be shamed by a man who never once worked as hard as I did. His face turned red. For one terrifying second, I thought he might come at me, but he didn't. He just stood there, breathing hard, because deep down he knew I had said the truth out loud. Later that evening, my father called everyone into the living room. I did not want to go, but I went. I already knew something was coming. The whole family sat in stiff silence while he cleared his throat and looked at the floor. That alone told me how serious he felt, or how afraid he was. Then he said, We need to talk as a family. Nobody spoke. He looked up at me first. Claire has returned. The legal matter has started. The truth is out now. We can continue fighting, or we can face what happened. My mother pressed her lips together. My brother crossed his arms. My sister stared at her lap. My father continued. I did not handle this well. That was the smallest version of the truth I had ever heard. I stayed quiet. He looked directly at me then, and his voice shook slightly. I should have protected you. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Not because it fixed anything, because it did not, but because it was the first time he had ever admitted what he had failed to do. My mother started crying quietly. Maybe she had been holding it in for days. Maybe guilt had finally caught up with her. She said, We thought the rumors would pass. I turned to her slowly. I did not believe what they said about you. Not fully. But I am sorry no one defended you. I thanked her. And after she left, I sat there for a long time thinking about how lonely someone can be even while surrounded by their own name. That night, I made another choice. I would not beg for a place anymore. I would create one, not just in that house. In my own life, I began looking at what came next. Could I stay in the home I helped build? Yes. Did I want to? Not forever. Because once betrayal shows you what a place really is, love alone is not enough to make it feel safe again. I realized I did not just need a room. I needed independence. So I started planning. I reached out to a former coworker abroad who had become successful running a small business. I asked questions. I explored possibilities. I looked into returning to work. Not because I wanted to run away, but because I wanted my future to be mine alone. For the first time, I was building something that no one in my family could touch. That alone gave me peace. Meanwhile, the family dynamic shifted in strange ways. My mother tried harder to be affectionate. My father talked to me more. My sister asked me questions about my life abroad that she should have asked years ago. My brother stayed resentful, especially the older one, who seemed to hate the fact that he had lost control of the narrative. He began trying to paint himself as the victim in small conversations with relatives. He said I was too harsh. He said I was making old mistakes into a public matter. He said I should just forgive and move on. That was rich coming from the same man who had let me sleep outside the gate. I heard all of it, and I said nothing. Because not every lie needs a response. Some lies collapse under their own weight. One evening, my father came into my room holding a small envelope. He handed it to me without meeting my eyes. Inside was a handwritten note. It was short, just a few sentences. He wrote that he regretted not protecting me. He wrote that he had been weak. He wrote that he knew words could not repair what he had allowed. I read it twice. Then I sat down on the bed and stared at the page for a long time. There was no tearful music in the room. No sudden forgiveness. Just me, the paper, and the silence of everything that had gone wrong. When he came back to check on me, he found me still holding the note. He asked softly, "Is it enough?" I looked up at him. "No," I said honestly. But it is a start. He nodded, tears in his eyes. And that was the closest we came to peace at the time. Months passed. The property issue settled into a formal arrangement that recognized my contribution properly. The details mattered less than the fact that the lie could no longer stand as truth. My family had to face what they had done. They did not like it. They did not embrace it. But they had to face it. And that changed the balance in the house forever. People stopped speaking in whispers when I entered a room. My brothers no longer acted bold in front of me. My mother still struggled with guilt. My father became quieter but more present. My sister slowly stopped looking at me like I was a problem and started looking at me like I was a person again. It was not a happy ending. It was a real ending. And real endings are rarely neat. They are layered, messy, painful, necessary. The biggest lesson I carried out of all this was simple. You can love people deeply and still need boundaries. You can help your family and still require respect. You can be quiet and still be powerful. You can be hurt and still refuse to disappear. That was me. I was the daughter who worked 18 hours a day in another country while everyone at home slept comfortably. I was the one who sent money faithfully because I believed sacrifice would be honored. I was the one who came back to a house built by my own sweat and was told I had no place there. And I was the one who stood back up when they tried to make me feel ashamed. That is the part I am proud of. Not because it was easy, because it was not. It was one of the hardest things I have ever lived through, but I came out of it with something stronger than trust. I came out of it with self-respect. And once you have that, people can no longer control you with silence. So if you are listening to me now, and you have ever given too much to people who did not protect you, I need you to hear this clearly. Do not wait for betrayal to become proof before you believe yourself. Keep records. Keep boundaries. Keep your dignity. And never let anyone make you feel guilty for wanting fairness in the very place you helped build. Because love without respect becomes labor. And labor without honor becomes pain. My name is Claire. I worked 18 hours a day abroad for 5 years. I sent money home with the hope that love would be enough. They built a house with my sacrifice. And even after I said all of that, even after the papers changed and the lies lost their power, there was still one thing I had to face. I had to decide what kind of woman I would become after this. That sounds simple, but it was not. Because betrayal changes you in quiet ways first. It changes the way you hear silence. It changes the way you look at family photos. It changes the way you enter a room. It changes the way your heart reacts when your mother calls your name. For a long time, I did not know whether I wanted to stay and rebuild or walk away and never look back. Some mornings I wanted to leave that house and never return. Some nights, I sat awake thinking about the 5 years I had lost, and I felt grief so deep it almost became anger. Not anger at one person. Anger at the whole chain of events, at the lies, at the silence, at the way people can watch a good person suffer and still call themselves family. But life kept moving, and so did I. I found work again, not abroad this time, but closer to home, through a woman I met while handling the legal process. She ran a small business and needed someone organized, trustworthy, and used to managing money. I had spent years sending, counting, tracking, saving, and surviving. That job felt like breath after drowning. At first, I did not tell my family. I wanted one part of my life to belong only to me. I would leave in the morning with my bag, my phone, my documents, and my dignity. I would come back tired, but it was a different kind of tired now. Not the kind that empties you. The kind that proves you are still building. And slowly, something inside me began to heal. Not fully, not magically, but enough to notice. I laughed once without forcing it. Then again. Then one afternoon, I caught myself humming while washing a cup in the kitchen. And for a moment, I felt like the old Claire was reaching across all the hurt to remind me she was still there. My mother heard me and looked surprised. She smiled carefully, like she was afraid I might disappear if she moved too fast. That kind of smile broke my heart a little, because it showed me she had finally learned fear, too. Not the fear of gossip, the fear of losing me. I do not know if that was enough to call it regret, but it was close. One evening, she sat beside me in the living room after dinner. It was quiet. The others had gone to their rooms. The house was still large and beautiful, but it no longer felt like the same place. Too much truth had passed through it. She folded her hands and said, "Claire, I used to think being a good mother meant keeping the family together." I looked at her without speaking. She continued, "I see now that keeping the family together is not the same as protecting one child from being sacrificed." That sentence stayed with me, because it was the first time she had said something that felt like truth, not excuse. I asked her, "Why did it take so long?" She closed her eyes for a second. "Because I was afraid," she said, "and because I was weak." Weak. I had waited a long time to hear that word. Not because I wanted to punish her with it, but because I needed someone in that house to stop pretending weakness had not played a role in my suffering. I nodded slowly. Then I said, "Fear is not the same as innocence." She looked at me. I kept my voice calm. "You were afraid of what people would think. I was the one they were talking about. You were afraid of shame. I was the one carrying it. Those are not the same thing." Tears filled her eyes. She did not argue, and that mattered, because for once, she was listening. Still, listening is not healing. It is only the beginning of it. A few weeks later, the family gathered for a small dinner to mark my father's birthday. It was supposed to be simple. No drama, no legal talk, no old wounds. But wounds do not disappear just because you set a table. We sat down, and at first everyone was careful. Too careful. Forks touched plates, glasses moved, nobody wanted to say the wrong thing. Then my oldest brother broke the silence. He looked at me and said, "So now what? Are we supposed to pretend everything is normal?" The room tightened immediately. My sister stared at her plate. My mother froze. My father looked up, worried. I set my spoon down slowly and asked, "Who said anything about pretending?" He leaned back in his chair. "You've made your point. The house is yours too. The papers are done. The neighborhood knows. Isn't that enough?" I looked at him for a long moment, and then I answered with the same calm he had not expected from me. "No," I said. "It is not enough." He frowned. "What more do you want?" I could have said 100 things. An apology, en admission, a public correction. 5 years back, my sleep back, my innocence back, but I did not say any of that.